and the path that you created for us in goodness. In Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. So this last verse kind of ends on this idea of love and respect. There's a book on love and respect. It kind of outlines the need for the guys' needs and girls' needs. Did you get the scriptures up there? Is it not working? Okay.
No, it was.
Okay, cool. So go ahead and, his love motivates her respect. So this is a basic idea, and that is that guys and girls are motivated differently. Now, this isn't meant to put somebody in a box. There's obviously, we're talking about human beings here. Everybody's different. Everybody's different in the range of the spectrum here based on 1,000 different factors. But nevertheless, in general, in relationship, in marriage, a guy receives love differently than a girl, right? And so Paul outlines this, and he says, husbands, focus on love, right? Wives, focus on respect. It all boils down to love. But men receive love differently. And, you've seen this in your relationships. Heather and I certainly see this all the time in our relationship. We've talked through this a ton. And even yesterday, after we got in an argument, that was awesome. And yes, Pastor still gets in arguments with his spouse. Afterwards, I repented a lot and then said, oh, by the way, I'm preaching on marriage tomorrow. Okay. Yeah. But our marriage almost, and some of you know this story, our relationship almost got thwarted or ended before it ever began, before we were ever even dating. We went on one date, and we all had a really, really good time. Heather lived 2 hours away. This was back when you had minutes on your cell phone, remember that? And so... anyway, she gave me her phone number. We were corresponding over email. There was no texting back then, and we decided we're gonna connect with one another over the phone. So I called her, and this was way before we had only been on one date, so we hardly knew each other, but there was a chemistry. So I called her. She's 18. I'm 24 at the time, and. I know, the lucky man. Okay. So I call her, and she picks up, and she says, I'd love to talk with you, but I'm all out of minutes. And so maybe you could call back another time. Which I took as, hey, I had a really good time, but not that good of a time to talk to you, so see ya. This is how I received the information as a dude. A rather naive, stupid dude, but nevertheless, that's how I received the information. And she received, he, will want to talk to me if he calls me back. So 2 weeks go by, and I didn't call her back. So we're literally almost at a place where we're not ever going to talk again, our paths aren't going to cross again, and her mom steps in and says, hey, maybe you're receiving it different than he's receiving it, maybe there is something here, and maybe you guys should reconsider and have a conversation. And then mom calls me and invites me out one more time on Mother's Day to hang out with the family, and the rest is history.
Amen. Come on now.
I wish our misunderstandings were history. But they're not. Anybody have any misunderstandings with your spouse or loved one? Yes. Right? Joe, you didn't even raise your hand. He's like, oh, I got this.
Joe's like,
so Heather and I have been on a journey, and our marriage is better than it's ever been, and nevertheless has all kinds of flaws. And we're still working on all these things. But I want to present to you 3 ideas that if you will follow them, your relationship will thrive. It won't be problem-free, it won't be conflict-free, it won't be argument-free, but it will thrive because these are biblical principles that I promise you work.
Awesome.
Sound good?
Yeah.
The first one is love is patient. So I want to highlight that we're going to hit 3 things that are outlined in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. I'm not going to read it because you could probably quote to me, and you probably have on a plaque in your bedroom or something, the love verse. Right? Love is patient. Love is kind. Love keeps no record of wrong. And it ends with love believes all things. So we're going to hit 3 of those. And the first one is love is patient. And it's seen in learning to surrender your expectations to God. So this starts with the idea that each of us come into a relationship with some expectations. And we don't see them as expectations. We see them as hopes, dreams, and desires. It's almost like we have a box of things that we come into a relationship with, and we say, these are our hopes, dreams, and desires. And when you come to a relationship, you go, this is my desire for the outcome of our relationship. Things like how we're going to deal with money, things like how we're going to deal with children, things like how you're going to treat me, things like how you're going to behave, who you are, how we're going to deal with conflict, all of these things. And you've formed these hopes, dreams, and desires, not necessarily systematically, but through your experiences, through what you've seen. Some of us have seen something that we don't ever want to do, so we've like just flopped it and said, I want the opposite. Right? But we have all of these things internally in us. So we come to a relationship and we say, these are our hopes, dreams, and desires. And at some point in the relationship, probably before you got married, you handed the box, metaphorically speaking, to your significant other, and you said, these are my hopes, dreams, and desires. Make them happen for me. And because they didn't say, no, I'm not going to make this happen for you, right? After your vows didn't include, hey, sorry, but like there's some of the things that are on your list and I'm not really going to perform. No, you went in going like, I love you, baby. I love you, honey.
I'm gonna do all of it.
I'm in. I'm going to do all of that. Come on, right? And so here we are, and now you have given your hopes, dreams, and desires to your significant other, and you're under the impression that we're all good and we're moving down the road to that end. Unfortunately, to your spouse before too long, or to your significant other before too long, those hopes, dreams, and desires don't feel like hopes, dreams, and desires anymore. I don't know that they ever did. They feel like a burden, an expectation, a weight that is not helpful in a relationship. Expectation creates a debt-debtor relationship. Whenever I put my hopes, dreams, and desires on you and say, I expect you to come through for me, then I live with the assumption that you owe me. Now, we would never say this in a relationship. We would never say, hey, honey, you kind of owe me. You owe me the way you're going to treat me. You owe me the way that you're going to, do the toilet paper the correct way, or the toilet seat. You owe me those things. You owe me the way that you're going to operate with our finances or with our children or whatever. We would never say like you owe me, because that's not sexy, right?
No.
But in our mind, in our heart, we feel that. Like, these are my desires. I gave them to you, and now my expectation is that you're going to come through for me, and so you owe me. And what the answer to the solving this, the answer to the question, what do you owe me, is nothing. See, we owe each other everything but are owed nothing in return. This is the Christ-like relationship. We owe each other everything but are owed nothing in return. Now, this is completely baffling. That sounds crazy. But love does not do well in an environment of expectation. In fact, it's almost impossible to recognize it when it's present. See, because you rarely celebrate somebody for doing their job. Right? At work, right? I mean, sometimes if you go out to eat and you feel really generous and you're celebrating the waiter or whatever, but like in terms of work, if you have an employee and they're just doing their job, you're not going to throw a party for them. You may not even say thank you. Because here's your paycheck, that's your thank you, and you're doing that. If you're going to go above and beyond, like maybe I'll celebrate you. But if you're just doing your job, then there's not really a lot of room for me getting like all giddy and excited about who you are and what you're bringing to the table. And so we can bring that into our marriage, because if you owe me, I have an unwritten, unspoken about expectation about what you're going to do for me, and then you do it, I don't necessarily feel loved. I just feel like you're doing your job.
Yuck.
Marriage was not created to be like that. So if you're a spouse and you're like, babe, I know what's important to you. Again, this is in your mind. I know what's important to you. Or honey, I know what's important to you. I don't know what words you use, so just go with me here. Babe and honey, we're going to work with that. So, honey, I know what's important to you, and so I'm going to work overtime. to really fulfill those hopes, dreams, and desires. I'm going to act a certain way. I'm going to do the toilet paper. I'm going to do all these things. And then if you ever got to the place where you're like, you feel like you're going overboard to say, I love you, and then the response is a frustration on the other end,
Yep.
as if they didn't receive the message. Hello? Anybody? Husbands, you know what I'm talking about.
Hands up.
Wives, you know what I'm talking about. Like you're doing something to say I love you, but it's not received on the other end. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but one of which is because maybe there's, at least at some level, a sense of debt-debtor relationship. Where like, I have these expectations on you, I feel owed, and now you're doing them, so I'm going to give you the pat on the back, but I'm not necessarily going to feel like we have this intimate connection because of those things. This is where we learn that love is patient. Patience teaches us to surrender our expectations to God. Now we're going to talk about what to do with this box, because we all have it. We all have these expectations. We all have these hopes. We all have these dreams. We all have these desires of what our spouse will do for us and the environment of relationship that they will create. And some of us, we're really like, drivers, and so we drive our spouse to that end. And some of us are a little more passive, and so we live with some regret and some frustration. But either way, it's not healthy, and it doesn't create connection and intimacy, which is the doorway that we're trying to open. And so, patience teaches us to surrender our expectations to God. Philippians chapter 4, verse 6 says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God." Now, this doesn't seem like a marriage verse, but it's a profound marriage verse. Because when you do not have your expectations met, the first emotion it creates that drives that unmet expectation is anxiety. I have a need, and it's not being met, so I get anxious. And what God is saying is, surrender that to the Lord. See, impatience is when we serve our fleshly desires. Impatience is when we say, I have an expectation, I have a need, and I am going to get that need met by expecting it, assuming it on somebody else. You need to do this for me because I have a need. Hello?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You need to do this for me because I have a need. It's called you owe me. I'm just giving you words to what you feel. All of us feel. Surrendering our expectations to God produces love, acceptance toward other, and acceptance always precedes change. So this is kind of where we're landing the plane on this first point of surrendering our expectations to God. So when you have this box and you're like, hey, I've got things in here that are important to me. The idea of surrendering your expectations to God isn't throwing caution to the wind and saying, nothing's important to me anymore. In a relationship, I don't care about finances, drive us into debt, honey, right? I don't care about how we raise our kids. I don't care about how you treat me. I don't even care about the stupid toilet paper. You know what? Who cares? Right? Hakuna Matata. That's just going to create resentment.
Yep.
Right? Don't do that. So what does it mean to surrender our expectations? Well, it means to surrender them to God. Surrendering them to God allows us to open up the realm of saying, you know what? I'm going to accept you for who you are. And I'm going to let patience have its work. Can I tell you the fastest way to see your spouse change? If this is all you hear today, it will help you. The fastest way to see your spouse or a significant other change in a way that you want them to change, stop trying to change them. Stop trying to change them. Patience. Let patience have its perfect work. Lord, I'm going to surrender this to you. These are my desires. And I give them to you. It's okay to have conversations about them with your spouse. It's okay to share what's important to you. But in the end, I'm going to give myself to this relationship, and I'm not going to live in the world of, you owe me. You don't owe me. Turn to somebody and say, you don't owe me. Acceptance always precedes change. The next idea is this. Love is kind. And that's seen in learning to listen and understand. What a powerful concept. Learning to listen and understand. We've never had this in our relationships. You never listen to me, right? That's never said in any relationship anywhere, but let's just pretend like it is. And lean into this one. Learning to listen and understand. So we've surrendered our expectations. We haven't surrendered the things that are important to us, but we've surrendered them to God and saying, God, I'm going to give you these desires that I have, and then I'm just going to give myself to this relationship in love and not live with a sense that you owe me. And so this next one is, I'm going to learn to lean into listening and understanding. And I'm going to start by highlighting a popular verse, and that is speak the truth in love. And this is going to help us to understand a little bit of how you deal with conflict. Because when somebody doesn't listen, it's because you're in conflict, and it's hard to listen when you're frustrated.
Right.
It's hard for me to listen when I'm frustrated. Maybe you can relate. Okay, so go ahead and go to that next slide. So, speak the truth in love is what we're asked to do. And so I'm going to highlight, we're all in one of these three categories. If you struggle to speak in conflict, then you're an avoider. Okay, so you're somebody who hates conflict. You don't necessarily feel like you have a voice. It's hard for you to get it out. Maybe it's hard for you to articulate. And so you typically avoid conflict. None of these things are good, by the way. You don't want to be an avoider. But we all have certain tendencies. I'm going to tell you mine. We all have certain tendencies that we lean to, and that would be yours. The second one is truth. If you struggle speaking the truth, then you give in. See, you don't have a problem communicating. You don't have a problem having a conversation. But when you're in a conversation, you err in love. So you have a problem speaking the truth. You don't have a problem receiving the truth, so you give in. You don't avoid the conflict. You're okay in the conflict, but you think that you're supposed to be the martyr. And so you engage in the conversation, and then you err on love, and you always lose. And that sounds awesome for your spouse, and it's great at mitigating the conversation, but you go down the road and eventually end up with bitterness and frustration and undealt with stuff that all of a sudden blows up. Anybody been in a relationship where you had a conversation and all of a sudden stuff came out that wasn't indicative of the actual situation? It's like, wow, it's like a volcano. There was a lot in there, wasn't there? Right? That's because the last conversation and the last 100 conversations, you did a great job engaging in a conversation and letting the other person win, but you didn't speak your mind, and so you didn't really get anywhere. The conversation just ended. And your spouse thought it was amazing.
Yeah.
Number 3 is love. If you lack love, you like winning. See, you love to speak and you love to bring truth. But the love part doesn't seem relevant because you don't need it to win.
That's evil.
Yeah, super evil. That's mine. Okay. Heather, as I said this before, so Heather's number 2 and I'm number 3. So we have to work on this a lot. Heather doesn't mind conversation. In fact, she hates to go on if there's anything undealt with in our relationship. It's like, man, let's talk about it. Let's not let the sun go down. I mean, she'll like turn on the lights at 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night. Like, let's deal with this, you know. And it's like, I don't have a problem dealing with it either, as long as we're going to go to bed and I won, right? So this is a struggle, right? Because Heather is a peacemaker and I'm a winner. And that creates a lot of dysfunction that we've had to work on. We're not perfect at it, but we've grown a lot. So this just helps you. You need to understand who you are and who your spouse is so that you can work on it. Otherwise, you're just going to run into a brick wall every 5 seconds. Good?
Good. Yeah.
Moving on. Okay, so it seems like in our culture, and I don't know about you, but sometimes I just watch politics just because I like to get a laugh. And then I get frustrated and I turn it off. But it seems like there's just like all-out war on keeping our right of free speech, right? That we have the right to talk. It's like we are guarding with like armed guards our right to talk. And I love this, and I think it's godly, and I think it's right, and I think it creates an environment of a free country, and I think that we should guard it. But I think it's a little interesting and a little ironic that nothing is said about the need for listening. I mean, in any of the circles, you talk about the politics, you talk about stuff you watch on YouTube, like it's all about people should have a right to say what's on their mind. And I agree. But no one ever talks about the value of actually listening. It's all about, I get to talk.
It's my turn.
It's my turn to talk. Information needs to be said, and so I'm going to say it. Where's the news camera? And as helpful as that is, it's not helpful when no one's listening. Truly listening. But see, it goes way beyond listening. Way beyond listening. We don't want to just be heard, we want to be understood. Being understood strikes at the core of our identity because it affirms, you see me as I see you. And this, so we've talked about who we are in conflict and how to have helpful conversations. So when we talk about listening, and we're going to talk about some practicals as relates to listening, but when we talk about listening, the goal is that the other person is understood. So when you're in a conflict and when you're in a discussion, it doesn't matter how long you pause in between talking and have a perception of listening. If the other person doesn't feel understood, then it wasn't a success. The goal is you see me as I see me. There is nothing more frustrating than being misunderstood. Having your motives and your intentions skewed. Has that ever happened to you? Maybe at work or in a relationship, right? Where when you're being honest with yourself and where your heart really is on something, and you present it, and somebody else, whether it's your spouse or somebody at work or whatever, takes that and skews it and twists it and paints you as something that you're not. Is that not the worst possible pain ever? It's the worst. And so when you take a moment to actually seek to understand your spouse and help them believe that you actually see them, not through a skewed lens, not through frustration, not through circumstances, but you actually see them as they see themselves, it's a doorway to connection and intimacy.
Awesome.
You see me. In counseling, we learned a lot of this in all the counseling we went to because we were so messed up. Okay, but we had a thing where we 5 years ago when we did this, we had a thing where our counselor had us look at each other. And when we did our marriage counseling, I had you do this. I won't do it today, but it's really profound and really hard to do. Is they had us stare at each other, look each other in the eyes for 2 minutes, which doesn't sound like a long time, but it's an eternity. When you're looking at somebody's eyes, you're thinking, do I blink? I don't know. And when somebody's staring at you, the goal is, it's one person's turn, and their goal is to look in your eyes and see, what do I see? And then when you're done, you articulate, this is what I saw. In other words, this is what I believe to be true about you. And then the other person gets to say how accurate that was. So it's like I'm staring at Joe for 2 minutes, which I won't do. And then at the end of that 2 minutes, I say, this is who you are, Joe. And then you tell me if this was correct. If I'm seeing correctly. It's profound. And sometimes it's way off. But it allows some space to go, do you see me? In the midst of all of our frustration, all of our arguing, or whatever dynamics, or whatever pressure we have with the finances, or all these things, in the middle of all that, do you even see me? Most of the time the answer is no. You don't see me. We may have a lot of conversations, but you can never be truly understood and walk away truly feeling understood if you don't feel seen. James 1:19 says, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. I love Proverbs 18. Proverbs 18 has a couple of one-liners that are awesome, but for the sake of time, there's just one of them. Fools find no pleasure in understanding, but delight in airing their own opinions. Oh my gosh. Right? Isn't that so true? Like, I have no problem. This is what I think. But like actually seeking to understand is profoundly different. So we're going to talk really quickly about 4 things that are helpful in listening. These are skills that we learned. And when I do them, the conversation goes really well. So the first one is this. Are you ready to listen? Ask, are you ready to listen? This is probably one of the most profound things that's changed our marriage as it relates to conflict, is that we give the other person the chance to evaluate, are they really ready to listen? Are you ready to listen? I've got something on my mind. I have a beef. I have a frustration. I need to talk to you. But before I get into it, I'm going to ask you a profound question. Are you ready to listen to me? And we give them an opportunity to say, no, I actually am not. I'm actually frustrated myself, or I got a lot going on right now, or I'm about to bounce out the door, and there's no way that I can give you the kind of attention that you're asking for right now. And so we just have a rule, like, hey, if the answer's no, then it can't just be no. It's got to be not right now. Here's when I would be ready to listen. Hey, can we talk this afternoon? That has to be okay. If you want to enter into helpful conversations and you want to position yourself to listen and expect someone to listen, then you have to create a space that's conducive for that conversation. Are you ready to listen? Yeah, actually, this is a decent time. The next one is prepare yourself to listen. So I'm a golfer, so I give this example like golfing. If you walk up to a golf ball, and you guys are just learning to golf, so you know this, man, golf takes a lot of concentration, very small room for error, and so when you're going to hit the ball, it takes setting up and actually thinking about it. If you watch a golfer, they take a lot of time over the ball. They're preparing themselves to not shank it into the woods. Right? They're going to have a good backswing, a good tempo, all these things you got to think about. And that is like listening. Are you ready? Yeah, I'm ready. Well, don't say that if you're not going to take a moment and go, all right, here we go. Then now you're thinking about what are the things I'm not going to do. I'm not going to interrupt, right? I'm not going to, just not tune her out and just say I'm listening. My tempo is going to be good, right? You're thinking about what does it look like for me to actually be an active listener so that the end result is she's heard or he's heard. Take this process. Prepare yourself to listen. Listen to understand and not reply. Listening is not the in-between the time you talk and the time you talk again. That gap is not listening.
No.
That's just silence on your part. Silence isn't listening. Listening is an active way of trying to understand what it is that's going on here. And that leads us to our last one. Listen to their heart and not just their words. This is, for us guys, where we fail every time, and we need to lean in, because oftentimes there's emotion involved. So not always, the words don't always tell the story, do they? Or maybe not the whole story. But they're trying, and sometimes those guys can get emotional, and sometimes it's flipped, right? But sometimes words don't tell the story necessarily, but there's an attempt, and so we land in, what's their heart trying to say? Oftentimes with Heather, I'm like, I don't necessarily agree with what you're saying, and I'm sort of having a hard time following you, and I'm sure she can say the same thing about me, but your heart is trying to say something. If I'm going to understand her, then my goal is to get to that. What is it that your heart's trying to say to me? And then repeat it back. This is what I hear you saying. Then my best effort to understand you, this is what I think it is. Is that right? Super hard to do. If you do it, though, it'll change your life. Last one is this. Learn to believe the best. Learn to believe the best. This is where love believes all things. So we talked about the importance of surrendering our expectations. We talked about the importance of leaning in to listening in relationship. And lastly, we're talking about the gap between what we expect and what we experience. Go ahead and throw that up there. What we expect and what we experience. I'm going to outline this just really quickly as we close. So, we live in that gap with your spouse of what you expect from them, whether it's a practical thing like, hey, you said you were going to go do this, you said you're going to come home from work on time so we can have dinner at 5, and so my expectation is you're here on 5, and then what I experience is you're here at 6:30 and you didn't call me, right? So we live filling in that gap, and you can create 1,000 different scenarios. It can be generally how the relationship's going, or it can be a very practical thing. We live filling that gap, and there's 2 ways to fill that gap. And this sets the tone for door number 3 on your connection and intimacy. What you put in this gap will either open up that door to connection and intimacy or slam it closed. There's 2 options. Believe the best or assume the worst. When there's a gap between what you expect and what you experience, you intuitively fill that gap every time with either assuming the worst about their motives, assuming the worst about the situation, we jump to conclusions, we're all riled and we're all frustrated, or we believe the best. There was a study that was profound that I saw out of Marcus Buckingham's book, The One Thing You Need to Know. It was a 20-year study of couples. And he did this study saying, I want to know, these 20 couples, what's the common denominator for thriving couples? What is it? And they had all kinds of assumptions, and their assumption was that all of these couples that ended up thriving after years and years of their life is that they lowered the bar on their expectations of one another. That was the expectation going into the study. Like, these people are happy after 40 years, and so the only way that that's truly true, like that they're really happy after all the things that they've been through, is that they've probably just lowered the expectation on one another and just said, you know what, I went into marriage thinking it was going to be amazing, and our connection and our intimacy and all these things, and you know what, what I've learned? What I've learned is that I'll be happy if I just lower the bar really low, and then I'm not disappointed. This is what they went into the study expecting. But they found the complete opposite. What they found is that they had, each spouse had an unrealistic belief in one another. That they had an unmerited favor and esteem for one another. In fact, they actually discovered that love is blind. And here's, after this non-Christian 20-year study of couples, here's the conclusion and the recommendation that they gave. When in a relationship, find the most generous explanation of each other's behavior and then believe it. Ridiculous. I mean, wow. Whenever there's a gap of what I expect and what I experience, find the most ridiculously generous belief about their motives, about their assumptions, about who they are, about how they believed this was going to affect me, and believe it. This was what they discovered. Crazy. And what they said was that this creates an upward spiral of love. The opposite, assuming the worst, creates a downward spiral of love. Love believes all things. There is power in love. This secular study proved to us what we've been reading all this time, and that is love changes people. In fact, love's the only thing that changes people. In fact, it was the goodness and kindness of God that led us to change. Right? Love changes people. I I choose what I put in that gap, not my spouse. I get to choose. Am I going to believe the best in them? Or am I going to assume the worst because they've proven to me that time and time again, they're going to let me down. And so I've trained myself, I'm just going to assume the worst because it's probably true. Right? They're going to let me down again. It's probably true. So I am merited to assume the worst. And what they're saying is, it's not about merit. It's about what you choose every time. I choose to put something different in that gap. And it's not dependent on what my spouse does or doesn't do. Why? Because you don't owe me anything. Whatever I expected, am I disappointed? Yeah. But you don't owe me. I choose. And I choose to believe the best. Sounds awesome, but it's extremely hard. How do we do that? Well, Christ-like love produces an unmerited belief in one another. They didn't earn it. This belief is generated by Christ. And that's why it's only possible to have this kind of relationship with Christ. Because it's the love of Christ that fills our tank, not our spouse. Fills our tank, and so then we can offer that to our spouse.
That's right.
I love you. You don't owe me.
That's good.
I love you. I mean, it's not rocket science for us Christians, right? I mean, obviously, the love of God that we extend to others is not based on their merit. This is what we would say. But we don't practice that in our relationships.
True.
Why? Because we're clouded by our expectations.
That's right.
You owe me, right? Because I gave you my whole life. I put on the ring. I said, till death do us part. And so this means you owe me. We don't say it like that. But that's what we feel when we fill that gap with assumption. I assume the worst because you let me down again. You have to earn a belief in you. If I'm going to believe in you, earn it. Show me. Right? It's trust. Show me. Show me I can believe in you. And what Christ-like love says is, it's not how it works.
Right.
More importantly, that's not what's going to change them. They're continuing to let you down. If you continue to assume the worst, it's called a downward spiral of love. You don't want to be in that spiral.
No.
You want to switch it to an upward spiral of love? Then you choose. I love you. You don't owe me. And the next time it happens, I'm going to assume a ridiculous belief that's true about you. And until you can prove otherwise, this is what I'm going to believe about you. You're amazing. And if you let me down, there's probably really, really good reason. If you're, at work late, it's because, man, you're just killing it with your boss and doing a great job and putting food on our table and you're coming home and it's like, you know what? I love you, babe. You're awesome. It seems naive. Christ-like love is. We're going to end with this. And thank you for letting me go long. I want to throw a caveat in there. When we're choosing to put something in the middle, believe the best or assume the worst. I want to make sure that you don't end up the victim and end up with resentment. And so when your spouse continues to let you down, that doesn't mean that you don't address what's in the middle. When you expected this, hey, you said you were going to be there, you said you were going to do this something, and you didn't, and you believed the best, and then it came out to be a total bummer. You need to have healthy conversations, right? You need to seek to understand, right? You need to work through all that. You need to express to your spouse, this is what's important to me, and this is what you said you were going to do, and this is what you did, and like here we are. This is a bummer for me. Okay, that's healthy. Here's the important thing. When that whole thing is done, healthy conflict, when that whole thing is done, you know what you do? You hit reset. And you go back to, I get to choose next time it happens, what I'm going to put in the middle.
Yeah.
I'm not going to drag last experience into today's reality, right? And then create this downward spiral of, oh, here it goes again. He did it again, of course, right? It just creates this bummer, and then you're pushing that on your spouse of here he goes, here she goes again, rather than hit reset. Don't drag the past in. It's hard to do, but don't do it. Don't drag the past in. Hit reset and go, you know what? Christ-like love says, I'm going to believe the best. Period.
Amen.
And they don't earn that. I give that freely.
That's awesome.
Because they don't owe me anything. There's resurrection power connected to belief. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17 says this. Therefore, if anyone's in Christ, he is a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come. This is the impetus behind our Christ-like love. A belief that your spouse is actually a new creation. So that means that we have the unique privilege to partner with God to see them become all that God's created them to be. That is our unique privilege. This is who they are. So your belief in them is not based on their track record. It's based on who they are, seen through the lens of the cross. Love says, I don't see you through the lens of your mistakes. I see you as God sees you. I see you through the lens of the cross. And I see potential in you that you don't even see in yourself.
Hallelujah.
This is who you are. See, this downward of love spiral gets started when we live in the natural. This is what you've done. This is who you are. This is your track record. And so it's just this bummer. And it's this constant assuming of like, you're just going to continue to be that way. And like, if you surprise me, awesome, I'll celebrate it for you. But if you just continue this way, then we're going to struggle and it's going to be frustrating and you're not meeting my expectations.
Yep.
But when we put on this new creation hat and this belief that belief has transforming resurrection power to it, then we flip the paradigm. And we say, you know what? I don't have to live on the bottom of the barrel.
Nope.
I can choose to put it in the middle. I believe in you more than you believe in yourself and more than you're even exemplifying in this relationship. I believe in who you are and you are amazing. And we know that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. If you believe that, it'll start coming out.
Amen.
You're amazing. You're awesome. I believe in you. You can do it. You're better than you think you are. Calling them up to this Christ-like life that God has created them to live.
Yeah.
This is the goal of marriage. We get to partner with God to bring our spouse to a place that's elevated above what they could do on their own.
Awesome.
You are strong allies. You are the best partner that God could possibly craft to bring out the best in that person. And if you live in a way that says, I'm not in this for what I'm going to get, because you don't owe me anything. I'm in this for what I get to see happen in you. Can you imagine if both couples did that at one time? Oh my gosh. That's called an upward spiral of love that explodes in amazingness and goodness. If you follow these three things,